Well, good day to all of you who managed to tune in to episode number 109 of the IABC Circle of Fellows. Or if you're watching this on recording, we're glad that you've been able to find us and look us up and join us for this exciting topic. We're going to be talking about change management and change communications and how the two are sort of related, joined at the hip, overlapping circles in a Venn diagram. And I'm sitting in for Shell Holtz, who normally sits in this moderator seat. And with me today, I will let each one of them introduce themselves. I have the world in front of me, and maybe we'll start on the first person to be able to get up on the day, because it's on the other side of the international date line. Let's go over to Zora for what's going on tomorrow.
Well, hello and good morning from Melbourne, Australia. Lovely to be here with you all today. I'm an alignment, brand and communication strategist, and I work with executive and senior leaders to help them get the most out of their people, brands and organisations. And happy to be here today.
Well, glad you're with us. And working my way from sort of east to west, let's go to Chicago, where Priya Bates is hanging out at a conference away from her normal base of Toronto.
That's right. So yes, I am in very sunny Chicago here for a conference, and I'm Priya Bates. I wear a couple of hats. I am president of Inner Strength Communication, which focuses on employees, internal communication, employee engagement, and change management. And then I'm also working on a company called A Leader Like Me that helps organizations build inclusive cultures with Advita Patel out in Manchester, UK.
And joining us from the Valley of the Sun is Cindy Schmie.
Yes, hi there. I'm here in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and I am currently an adjunct faculty at Southern New Hampshire's online graduate communication program, and then where I share expertise gained over 30 years of working in corporations, gaining a lot of experience in change communication in that time.
And the fourth panelist joining us from the Pacific Northwest, Tosha Torrey. Welcome, Tosh.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm in Seattle, Washington. I work for F5 Inc., where we do data and systems application security. I am the continuous improvement lead within the business transformation office, and I manage the change management as well as our continuous improvement analyst teams.
Well, maybe that's a great place to start. And if I go back and look at job descriptions for communications people X number of years ago, fill in the blank, it probably didn't include anything about change management. And there's a whole, but at the same time we did it, but maybe we didn't call it that. I think it's a discipline that's come into fruition. In fact, just as one can become a certified communications professional, one can be a certified change manager. But let's start by talking a little bit about maybe where change communications and change management come together, and what sort of overlap you guys see in this field.
Who's going to start? Maybe I will go ahead and
start.
Yeah,
you just did.
I was the first person, right? So I always say that, I worked with a lot of organizations over the last 30 years who go through transformational change. And there are communication professionals that I know who are pro-sci or have some sort of change management certification as well. So they know the methodology of change from a change management perspective. I've always chosen to be the change communication support to that change management person or the project manager, because I like playing that different role in terms of really understanding the employee audience and the leaders and helping them talk through the change once I've got somebody who manages the methodology.
Well, maybe we'll toss it over to you, Tosh, because you've sort of got a foot in both camps, as opposed to Priya saying, I'm doing communications with someone else. What's your take on things?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As I started to work in change management, I would kind of joke with my change management colleagues that there are practices within change management that we as professional communicators have been doing for decades. And so I would say that the core difference that I'm observing is that within change management, there's much more of a conscious awareness that you have to start change from the very, very beginning. When I was focusing mostly on communication, oftentimes the complaint was we're brought to the table very late in the process. So within change management, it's very well known that change starts on day one. And so as soon as you start talking about a program or project opportunity, change must be at the table to be part of the design of what that program or project is going to look like. Don't know why that never happened, or it was difficult for that to happen for communication professionals. But that's the number one thing that I always say is that you have to have your change manager at the table from day one.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because we have been doing this work for decades, but the formalization of change management field has really legitimized all what goes on and makes it much easier to support the process with good communication.
I agree with you all. When I think about change management and I think about the difference between change management and change communication, I reflect on the fact that change communication is one aspect of change management. So it's one of the 5 sort of elements of it. And it's important to distinguish that. It's that communication is not necessarily the change manager, although there are times that we can play the same role subject to the organisation and what the actual change project is. So it's important to distinguish between the two, but there are definitely overlaps between them and sort of intersectionality between the two functions.
I think given that the purpose of communication is to change behavior, perception, or understanding, change management could not happen without good, solid communication.
100%.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think one of the nuances of change management is the emphasis on creating experiences. So to achieve behavior change, we can't just share information and expect people to do things. We need to provide those experiences where they can do, they hear, they do, they learn. And that's where we can achieve behavior change in helping people understand what is truly expected of them from a tactical perspective or behavioral or perceptual perspective. So I would say that's probably the one distinction that, often communication, we are articulating, trying to increase awareness, and we gain understanding by giving folks hands-on experiences.
Well, I mean, we are good at doing that who, what, when, where, why stuff and sort of relying often on facts. But I think the other piece that we have to recognize, and you sort of hit upon this, and I'd love to go to Zora for her comments on this too, is there's an emotional aspect to change that sometimes doesn't make it into our, I'll call it, fact-based explanation of the who, what's going on and the why. And Zora, I know you have actually just finished writing a piece about emotion and change that by the time some people are seeing this, it's probably actually going to be part of the IABC communications world.
Yeah, it's going to be in Catalyst in November. So it's a piece about the role of emotion in change. And we all know that, emotions can run really high and resistance builds and motivation drops. And change doesn't just come from those well-structured plans. It's coming through managing that emotional energy of people. And there's a model that I like to refer to, which isn't necessarily about change management per se, but it does impact people at times of stress. And it's called the SCARF model. And it's a brain-based framework that helps you understand what are the emotional triggers people have and the resistance that they might have when they go into some sort of engagement. And there are 5 particular areas. So SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatability, and sorry, my dog's starting to bark, and fairness. So what I find is important is to recognise, my dog's just running past me, to recognise what the emotion is that is being triggered in people. So, and if it's triggered, it can be almost as painful as physical pain, and people tend to either fight or flight. So it triggers that sort of response. So if you understand what people might be triggered by, then you're able to adjust your communications accordingly to that particular person, because we know that you can't change organisations unless you change the individuals in terms of their minds and behaviour. And so you have to work on change from an emotional perspective, and that's where communication becomes really, really important.
Yeah, and you did promise that your dog was going to be making a cameo appearance at some point during our webinar today. So you're more than welcome to be able to share his voice and his thoughts and his emotions with all of us too. What I'm also hearing, and maybe we can explore this as a topic, is that what I'll call it sort of like change management is not a solo sport. It sort of requires a team. So I guess the question I've got is sort of like who are the essential players on the team? And we've sort of been hitting at it, but is it just change management expert and a communications person, or what are some of the teams that you've seen play?
I think the best change initiatives I've been a part of in organizations I've worked with brought the right people around the table who had the potential to make impact. So if it's a reorganization we're talking about, leadership and HR, IT has to be at the table because of those aspects of the changes that we're going to be communicating, along with the change manager. Really having those subject matter experts around the table is imperative. When we went through the world's largest SAP implementation, you needed to have operators around the table, people who understood how shipping and receiving worked. You had to have people who were experts on what we were changing in order to inform the process.
I'd like to tie back what Zora said about emotion and Priya, but because it's not just the team around the table, but the collaboration that goes on wider than that team itself. I think about acquisition plans, and change plans. And when I've been involved in acquisitions, it's always about going to the facilities that we're acquiring, learning about the people, learning about what their emotions are tied to the company that they have, and try to bring some of that forth into the communications planning for the acquisition, because their company name's going away, their brand is going away. And so to be able to bring the emotions that they carry into the communication planning truly does help.
Yeah, I think a critical role is your change sponsor. So who is at the top of the organization that is ultimately the sponsor of the initiative? Something that often happens is you do your kickoff meeting, everyone's sitting around the room and they're nodding their head. You have all those key stakeholders, they're nodding their heads, and then they walk out of the room, they go to the sponsor and they say, hey, so tell me, what is the business value, or what is the value that we're going to achieve in this change? If the sponsor can't articulate that value, and if the sponsor doesn't commit that we want to allow people the time, the resources they need in order to manage that change, then the entire initiative will fail.
Yeah. There's been some work by an organisation out of, I think they're in Europe. They're called Innovisor, and they are a change management company, and they looked at 15 years of data from all the clients that they worked with, and they came up with the 6 blockers of change. And one of those, there's a number of obviously important parts to it, but one of those is what Todd's talking about, is when the leaders lose that interest and momentum in the change, and that happens more often than not. So they have to really be on board throughout the process, because the leaders have been involved in the change, in the thinking about it, in all the decision making way before the rest of the organisation or the team that's going to be impacted, or the part of the business that's going to be impacted, has come into it. So they're sort of done, even though it's not necessarily finished, whilst everyone else is still going through the emotions and the change process. So it's important to make sure that they're still on board. As well as then you've got the other people who they call the 3%ers, or the people who have a lot of influence over how others think and behave. So if you can make sure you can get those influencers on board in the change process, then you're much more likely to succeed as well and align them with the leaders.
Is change communication, cascading alone doesn't work, or maybe it never did. I mean, you probably have to, I mean, we're sort of hitting at what are some of the sub audiences that you need to reach? And it's some of these influencers, some of the leaders who need to be out in front and on top of things before it goes to everybody else. But maybe you could sort of explain some of the communication models that you've seen that work and work well for some places, because in today's age where everybody can get everything all at once, all at the same time, that may not work as effectively in a change model.
Yeah, I think Zora touched a little bit about the fact that we can't be all things to all people, and we need to understand we can't be one size fits all, right? Especially like I've done mergers and acquisitions. Somebody mentioned that how one group is going to receive the information is very different from another. So it's doing that research. Cindy talked about finding out what people want and what are their motivations, and understanding what we need to do to get through to them in a way that matters. It's very different in a grocery store versus a trucking organization or a mine, right? So having that stakeholder analysis, we all talk about stakeholder analysis as being that key first step in a gold quill entry, really understanding who they are, what they need to know, where they are, how do we get to them is really important.
And you building on that, it's you could dive into the segmentation aspect of it. When you're doing that stakeholder analysis, you're doing that segmentation in the process, but really defining who are these people, what's the persona like, what sort of what stage are they at in terms of, say, the change curve or something along those lines, so you know how to create the right sort of communication for them. So it's really important to understand the people involved. And as Priya said, it's not a one size fits all. It just never is. It can't be.
I think building on Zora's point that change is often associated with a loss. And so there's the grief of loss. What I have found is that it's not just cascading. It's not just customizing at the right level. It's a combination of both, because when you think about times when you are dealing with loss or grief, you want validation from as many points as you can get. And so in a change effort, if I hear leadership cascading down a certain message, and then my team has customized messages that target specifically what is happening to me versus my peers in another function, I want to make sure that those messages are consistent. And that helps me gain the confidence that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, 100%. It's that being congruent. So, when you hear, whether you hear one message or you hear multiple, they make sense together. And that's where the communication professional comes into play. You have to make sure that you're connecting the dots so it all makes sense.
Is there a role that technology can play in change communications? Having spent a ton of my time in the whole tech sector, you sort of look at and the way it's sort of taken over so much of what it is that we do on a daily basis. Is it a helpful ally, or does it hinder? Or, again, is there a best practice for using technology in affecting change?
Well, one of the things I always talk about is that whenever we're going through any internal communication, it's about focusing on the conversation versus the campaign, and that's usually the crux of the headbutting that I have with change managers. Sometimes is it's all about the next new thing. Let's give the change a brand. Let's give it a logo. Let's create a lot of materials and splash it with posters, but we actually need to be paying attention to what people are talking about. And especially in a hybrid world, what are they talking about in their own circles where we can't listen? So, we used to refer to Brad about skunkworks in the technology industry, people creating their own Facebooks, their own social groups, their WhatsApp groups, their Slacks, and having conversations on the side that we are not aware of. the more we know and understand our people, then we can use technology to create that conversation in a space that is open, and we understand what that is, and we create a safe space and psychological safety to express both your hopes and your fears.
I think to Priya's point, to avoid kind of those underground messaging, to be able to increase transparency of what is the reality. And so technology can be used to provide people access to information where they want it, when they want it. And I was going to bring out also the importance of communication is the agility, understanding that we only know what we know today. And so particularly in change efforts, oftentimes there are things that we don't anticipate. So being able to pivot quickly as we learn more and communicate what's changing within a change effort to our various stakeholders helps them see that we are looking out for them, and we are going to keep them informed. We understand that we don't have it perfect from day one, but we're going to make sure that we are sharing the information as we get it.
Well, and I'll also say technology can help us sort of keep our ear, into those conversations that are taking places that are sometimes difficult to get to in person. I should mention that if you would like to ask a question of any of us or join in the conversation, there is a chat box, and it's sort of when you put something in and hit send, it sort of pops up on the screen here. So we would love to invite any of you who want to be a part of this. Please do so if you're watching the program live. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, transparency might be a nice way to describe this stuff, because often I think change managers, change communications people are privy to things that are going to be coming that may have, I'll say, negative impact on parts of the world. But at the same time, you want to be open, but you also have things that you may not be able to disclose for a certain point. So talk us through some of the challenges that you face when you're trying to balance these two things of the openness versus the can't spill all the beans because ... whether it's regulatory or goodness knows why. Anybody want to jump in with that challenge?
Everybody's really quiet about that one.
Yeah.
I think, you know what, I was doing manager training just earlier this week, and getting leaders comfortable with saying, I don't know, or I can't share that information yet, but as soon as I can, I will. And then committing to that, being accountable to that when you can share information. So I think your employees are also your shareholders. They're your customers. They understand that there is a certain amount of privacy and confidentiality that's associated with changes. But if they trust that you will let them know when you can, that makes a really big difference. And part of that is, they need to trust their leaders. And right now, I think that's the biggest piece of all. If they don't trust you, they don't hear you.
I will share one thing that I saw was a really great practice. I'm not sure how far away. John Chambers, when he was the CEO of Cisco, used to, in front of a all employee audience or a town hall meeting or something, would say, I'm going to tell you something. He had a great West Virginia lilt. I'm going to tell you something, but we got to keep this inside the family because not everybody knows about this yet. And then he would say something. I'm going, you're telling 50, 60,000 people something and you want them to keep it quiet. That is sort of showing some of that transparency and openness, and probably not sharing as much as he could have, but taking people down the path. And I guess another question that's related, we've talked about segmentation of audiences, but let's talk a little bit about timeframes, and it very, very much would depend upon what the topic is that's being changed. But what sort of element does time have to play with change and people's acceptance of change and the communication thereof?
Not too many quiet points. I think the longer, I always say that the rumors are always 10 times worse than the truth. And so we need to fill that space with information or updates on a regular basis. Brad, both of us were part of the HP Compaq merger in the early 2000s. And under knowing what that was like when we didn't know if our organizations were actually going to be merged. You were on the HP side, I was on the Compaq side, and the proxy battles that were very, out there in the media. So there was a lot of noise being made about whether things would happen or not, and was really keeping the employees focused and continuing a conversation that was open and honest with them through our leaders in order to build trust and in order for them to understand what was happening now, what did we know about, and what was happening next, and when will we fill them in.
This is a good place where the change manager and the communication can link up, because the change management plan has all the timeline of things that are going to be coming along and when new information is going to be happening, the different levels of a change. So the communicator can build some words to go along with all of those stages, but of course being agile to what's going on. And the other piece though is that, so the change happens. So the merger's day is here, it's done. That isn't the end of the communication. It has to go on for a while afterwards by listening to what's going on, understanding what the audience is thinking, so that we can continue to build to the positive outcomes of a merger or an SAP or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think building on what Cindy just mentioned, because since I manage both the process folks as well as the change folks, we always talk about the continuous improvement aspect. So even at the end of the merger or the end of the implementation or whatever that significant change is, understanding that when folks are actually in the new environment working day to day, we may discover new things. So that doesn't mean that we live with, we discover things that break what was defined or challenge what was defined. And so that doesn't mean we just live with the pain. From a continuous improvement perspective, we make subtle adjustments as we discover those needs, so that we don't allow things to degrade to the point where everything is broken. And so I think that's a critical part of the change effort as well as the communication effort, helping people understand, don't sit and suffer through the pain. If we can fix it, let's fix it.
It's interesting. I was talking with a client recently, and they go through a lot of change in their organization. It's pretty much just constant all the time. And the sort of change that we're talking about is, changes to structures of teams, roles being moved or cut out, or, it's constantly happening, and they have a whole area that deals just with that type of change from the people and culture perspective. And then you've got your change communications that comes into it as well. And pretty much once the go live date happens, that's it. That's the end of the project. There's no funding for change communications to continue. So they're just on to the next project. So despite the fact that we all know that the change is continuing and it still needs work, it just doesn't exist. They're just moving on to the next piece. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality of it. So it becomes very, very difficult.
There are places that they change as a constant, get used to it. And at a certain point, maybe on the receiving end, you become a little bit numb to some of this stuff. I guess if there were a finish line, if you want to call it that, one of the questions that I have is about metrics. We've closely tied to entering things in an IABC Gold Quill competition. And one of the things you have to do is prove that what you did actually accomplished the business goals. Maybe you can talk a little bit about metrics and change management, and how do you know when you've reached the end, and what are some successful metrics that people have seen or used or been aware of?
I always say limited disruption, right? That you're keeping the lights on, that especially when I do reorganization communication, people don't think about the fact that people need to understand what this new normal looks like with the changes in structure or loss of people who used to be responsible for things. And if your stop was announcing the reorg, then you've got a bunch of people who are in chaos, not knowing where to go next. And that disruption actually contributes to work that isn't getting done and customers that are not being served. So paying attention to customer service stats and satisfaction, paying attention to results and profits and revenues are really important to say we're moving things along and we're not losing that time because people have stopped. Because when people sit in fear and anger, they actually stop performing. So our goal with communication during those changes, because it is emotional, is to really help them understand what now and what's next, and what does success look like for us.
I've found working with some clients that this is the area that most of them get stuck on and avoid, because they find it's difficult to do in their minds, they avoid it and just do the change, move on, But one of the important things to think about from a communication perspective is that if you're able to measure the success of the work that you've been involved with, you can then demonstrate your value. And we all know that we are dealing with communication functions that talk about not being seen the way that they should be seen, or not being valued as much as they could be. Or when you talk to people about issues with change, they talk about being brought in to be late into the change process. So they're not really seen as a valuable partner as early as they should be. So you need to adapt that. And the way to do that is to demonstrate your value, to create the value and demonstrate the value. And to do that, you need to be able to measure and evaluate in the process. I think that's really important to emphasise. And there's lots of different ways to define the objectives and distinguish, as we know, between the outputs and the outcomes and all that sort of stuff, and tie it back to the intent and the objectives, and benchmark early and measure during and at the end of the change, and then demonstrate the evaluation.
Well, I like to, again, the connection between my process folks and my change folks is aligning the value to the 7 wastes of Six Sigma. And it's all around productivity. How do we make sure that employees are most efficient and effective in the jobs that they're doing, and we see an improvement in productivity? And so modeling on the 7 wastes of Six Sigma help us define different metrics for each initiative where we can demonstrate improvements in performance.
Another sort of it's out there. How useful is the idea of storytelling in change communications, change management? Is that, who are the storytellers, and is there an appropriate time to tell stories? Because the other question I've heard a lot, I've seen some people run up against is, everybody wants to tell you what that future state is going to look like and how great it is, but not everybody's quite ready to hear a story of sort of a fairy tale of the what might be, because that has not occurred yet. So how does storytelling help or hurt with change communication? I should have given you guys the list of questions that I was going to pass along a little bit earlier on, so you'd all be thinking about them. But this is a really good test. I mean, all of you have been up to the challenge of where's that one coming from? Or what's he going to come up with next?
One of the things, Zora, I think you or your the conference out in Singapore a few years ago introduced me to Gabrielle Dolans, who does a book called Stories for Work. And I use that book and share it with a lot of my clients all the time in terms of how do you use a story successfully in order to move things forward and connect with employees. So great from a leadership perspective to create connection, not necessarily about how the change plays out, but how I feel when I'm going through that change, and how do I work through those feelings? So there's a lot of great analogies that really connect the leaders and help build trust. The other thing we've done, and a lot of my consultants have done really, really well from a storytelling perspective, is describe why the change is necessary, especially when it comes to digital transformation. For instance, we used at Loblaw Companies Limited during the SAP implementation, we actually all started talking about a tub of yogurt, right? So it was really about, with what the plan was, why we were spending money, is that yogurt would be in your fridge 2 weeks earlier than it is now. Right. And it was really connecting that it goes through the process, and it's going to go through faster, and we're going to get it into your, on the shelves and in your fridge faster, so that its end of life is, it spends more time with you than it does in the process of getting to you. And it was, that story ended up being captured by every media outlet when we used it. And it became that symbol of how we actually explained what we were doing and why, with everyone from cashiers to shippers and receivers. So that, because it was just this little analogy that made so much sense, because we could all relate to it.
And that's the whole point, isn't it? It's to help people understand better, and using story. I think there's a stat, but I'm not sure who came up with it, that a story is 22 times more likely to be remembered than a fact. So if you can, even if you're talking about data, you can still create a story around it, the way Priya was talking about with the tub of yogurt, because it makes more sense and people can visualize it. And if you're doing story and you're using story with intent, so you've got a business message attached to it, and that is certainly most likely to be the why of the change. If you can tie something to that will make people understand it and visualize it, and perhaps a leader is sharing a personal story, like you were talking about around Gabrielle Dolan's style. So sharing a personal story is always much more effective, or doing a we story perhaps, where you've gone through some sort of experience, whether it's a triumph, a failure, some sort of tension where your values have been tested, or some sort of change process yourself, and you've got a lesson learned, and you can attach that lesson to a particular message that you want to deliver. That's always going to be much more effective, and it's particularly strong when you're starting to sell the process of, this is why we're doing the change, and it's about reinforcing it when you need to. And you can train your leaders and the various people involved in the change process to do that, use storytelling with intent and do it really well, so it becomes much more natural for them to deliver. So if they practice, they're going to be able to do it much better, and it'll work much more effectively.
I like this. It goes back to what Zora said initially about emotion. Storytelling connects emotionally with the audience, so it's going to deliver more results.
Yeah, it inspires people. You can inspire people, you can educate people, you can entertain, you can inform, you can move them to action through story. So it's just a matter of understanding how to tell the story, but do it concisely and have a business message linked to it that makes sense, and only have one message, not multiple. Otherwise, stacking it, then you just lose the effect of the whole thing.
Has the term burning platform disappeared from change management? Because I remember early on, it was, you need to create, if you want to move people from one place to another, you need to create the burning platform to get them to start moving. So, are there other ways to go about this, or, new terminologies and new methods that have come into play since burning platforms have been extinguished?
I mean, ultimately, we're talking about the problems we're trying to solve, right? And maybe the burning platform is a corporate term that people don't like as much. You might as well just use real talk and say, here's what we're trying to do, and here's why, here's why it's really important. for us to get there. So that whole focus on, again, the conversation versus the flashy campaign, because especially when, I don't know about the rest of you, but the organizations I'm working with don't have one change going on at a time. It's usually 20, right? And that's the reality. So really thinking, and often all of these different change programs have different change managers and project managers and operational leaders. And sometimes you can get to a point where they're not aligned and they're not connected, and nobody has that bird's eye view of what's going on in the organization and how it's all connected, and we always start with any of our messaging. We start with the values and the strategy and the mission and the purpose and the vision of the company, because everything should be linked back there. And that's something that's a thread that continues when you're, in day-to-day operations, but then also reinforce it. We shouldn't see a change initiative come out of left field and feel like it's not connected to all of those things. And when it is, that's when we start again losing trust and creating confusion and chaos.
Yeah, to Priya's point, my question would always be burning platform for whom? Who's that important for? And then going back to Zora's comment around the loss, the grief, with change initiatives, you can actually pivot the loss and welcomed loss to what is causing you pain. Let's resolve that pain. Let's eliminate or mitigate that pain. Change efforts should be reducing any challenges, roadblocks, things that are getting in your way of being successful. So that's where we help gain whoever's a direct or indirect benefit of the change, get their buy-in, is that we are resolving pain, we're eliminating that pain that they're experiencing.
Such a good point, Todd, because the loss, in neuroscience, the loss apparently is 4 times more powerful than gain. So eliminating the friction is more likely to work than focusing on the gain.
We've talked in corporate circles for years about engagement of employees and engaged employees. And I think what you also see is surveys that say this percentage of the total audience is not engaged. How critical is it that we've sort of been talking about bringing everybody along and having everybody arrive, if possible, at the finish line at the same time, because it's a train, it's moving, and there are certain milestones, but do we have to reach to engage people or try to engage people along the way, or is that a part of change management, is engaging everyone?
I still struggle with engagement. When we think about how we measure it, it's we're saying good things about the company, which I totally think is a good idea, especially when we're going through transformation and change. But we're staying with the company, so that's all based on retention, and we're striving to go above and beyond. And I think where you're starting to see, especially the new generation, roll their eyes is, maybe if 100% of us just did our job, that would be transformational for the organization. I think we're going to change how we look at engagement, and I want to make sure that we articulate what needs to be done. What do employees need to be aware of? What do they need to understand? What do they need to do? And then how do we make sure they believe in the cause? And that what we're measuring is that they're delivering what they're supposed to be doing, which is the job. Right. And I think that it's really clearly articulating that, whereas I think sometimes the engagement scores expect people to always be on this above and beyond, and people are just tired.
Sounds like we have to have a change management project about changing engagement.
Yeah. I think that the engagement element within a change effort, in change management, the phrase is engage early and often. And so you may think about a situation where a change happened to you, and I'm going to say to you, not with you, to you, because someone changed something and then they told you this is what's changing. And you may have sat there and thought, well, this impacts me and no one asked me. How is it going to impact me? How do I deal with this? And so from a change management perspective, the engagement is we can't have everyone sitting at the design table. But what we can do is share information from the design table and say, give us your feedback. So creating that experience, that engagement at every level. Tell us what you think. If we were to do this, how would it affect the way that you do your job on a daily basis? So there are things like gamification, where you can seek feedback and reward teams or individuals that give you something that actually is implemented in your final designs. Making sure that instead of just saying, this is what we're going to do to you, it's this is what we'd like to do with you. How do we make this happen? And so the engagement part of change management is providing those experiences that help people, every person who cares, a opportunity to be part of what is being changed.
I wanted to put in a short plug, if I can, for another resource besides the four of you guys. If you ever want to pick up the IABC guide for practical business communication, there's a chapter in this guide called Change Communication in a Changing World. It's by Nick Sharp-Paul. And I just sort of say, if you're using this IABC Circle of Fellows discussion, perhaps as a study aid to tackling communication certification, also get the guide and read what others have to say, because it's a perspective from yet one more senior communications person in the IABC world. And also a lot of the examples that he has come from the UK. So we've got the whole world in front of us explaining everything and that's so good about communications. And I guess the other one that I would love to, maybe we've heard a little bit of case studies, but if you could sort of think of have you thought of one that went really well, and why did it go really well? And if you've got sort of one, you probably have to disguise who it was that didn't go so well and why it didn't go well. Could you give us sort of an example of things that you have seen that either a plus or a delta needs a bit of a change?
So I could probably talk about the reorg communications. We had one in particular that was material and had a fairly large number that was going to make the press. And obviously, because it was material, you couldn't announce what was happening until you also announced it to the market, and hit the news across the country. 700 people being let go. And it was really, I was involved very early on, to the point where I knew what was happening, 5 years out in some cases, as we went through these changes. And I think that what was great about that is one of the big key measures was, because this was a very big reorg, we knew that reporters were going to be outside in the parking lots waiting for people to walk out with boxes and wanting to get a statement. And what was amazing about that one is not one employee talked to the press, because they thought they had the information. They felt they were treated respectfully. And we really used a values lens. We'd launched our values just earlier, a few months earlier. And we really said, we have to live our values, not only in the good times, but in the bad times as well. And we need to be honest with those. And so really that respect actually, and open communication and transparent communication actually led to people not going to the press, even in their, in a pretty tough situation, and remaining committed to the organization. And that was a real highlight for me.
Yeah, maybe I'll give a contrast to Priya's. This did not happen in my world. I just heard of it when I was doing an org restructuring, where there was an organization that restructured, and then on the given date that they announced, all employees were to go to the common room in the building, and there were lists on the wall. And they looked at the list to see whether or not their name was or was not on the list. If your name was on the list, you had 1 hour to go to your desk, collect your things, and leave. So obviously, an example of really bad change management.
Wow.
Oh.
That's cold.
Hmm.
Cindy or Zora, you got something that went well or could use improvement?
Well, I have several that went well, some that didn't. But this one that really went well is we had a merger between two organizations, the one I worked for and a major competitor. So two leading industry competitors. And we had a merger. So we used that opportunity to change the company name so that the people from the other company, either company, we created it a whole new and went with it. Yeah, there were some hiccups, but we did it through, frequent communications. We involved the employees in coming up with the name of the company through lots of focus groups at all the facilities and getting people involved. And we were very consistent in our approach. And even after the merger ended, it kept going because we had a new company name. We had to build the brand. So we were able to increase the brand awareness of that new name. Within 6 months, we had like 90% industry awareness of that brand name. So it really did go well. And the employees, we didn't lose employees because of the merger.
All right, I will jump in. I can think of plenty of bad ones, but I will jump in with a good one. And a few years ago, I was involved in an exercise where two competitor organisations merged, and they were trying to decide which brand was going to be the name of the business overall. And they'd been through the process for just under a year. So they were these two organisations working together, joint board, and they couldn't make a decision. So the process that I undertook with them was to evaluate and assess the equity in the various brands and then put a recommendation to them as to which way to go and come up with the strategic approach to that. And that actually worked really, really well. So now, they're a very successful business here in Australia, operating under the one brand name. And it was that exercise that actually brought them together to finally work together as an organisation, as a cohesive whole, rather than two disparate businesses. But it took a bit of effort, and you needed the research to support why it was going to work, and then the external expert advice rather than just the internal had to be brought in for the board to move forward and accept the approach and the plan and then to roll it out.
Oh, it's very helpful to hear the perspective. I've got one to share, but I'll also, let me tell you the next question so you can be thinking about that while Brad babbles. I want to get your sort of take on, if you were to offer career advice on somebody coming into communication and saying, you're probably going to be asked to do something in the communications around change, what kind of counsel would you have for them? Let me tell you about one that didn't work and then that did work. And there were enough people around who have lived through both parts of it. It was a big technology uplift, and they decided to pull in the change experts and the process people to sort of plot this whole thing out and come up with the charts and the timelines and all that sort of fun stuff. And what they didn't do was involve the business people who needed to use the systems or the IT people who ran the systems. They just sort of used consultants to say, here's the perfect map for you to do this. And it did not work very well. And there were a lot of people who, as soon as they heard, we're going to be doing a new upgrade, it's like, the last one's a major failure. The good news was that they learned from the past, and they were able to not only start tapping the resources, but they created an org structure that they call it 2 in a box. They had somebody from the IT organization and somebody from the business side of things who are going to be the users of that part of the IT to work together to make the decisions that would sort of not only optimize, it wouldn't optimize for one part, but destroy the other. It really came up with a wonderful, good balance between the two. So sort of a tale of the, don't do it that way, try this. And I think the basic lesson I get from that is, and everybody's hit upon that so far, is, you really need to involve the people who are involved at some point to help shape that new future, whether it's active, whether it's giving feedback, some way involved in the communications process, so that the outcome has a little bit of their thumbprint on it, so that they can go, yeah, I can see myself. This fits because I had a chance to say something about it. So with that, why don't we sort of bring it to a close with just sort of like you've got somebody who's looking at communications careers and knows that part of it may be doing some change communication. What kind of counsel might you have for people?
I'd like to say that change communication, return to the fundamentals of strategic communication. Mm-hmm. Align the work with the mission, vision, values of the organization, understand the audience, set measurable goals and objectives, measure the results of the program, and then consider the continuous improvement needs so that you can improve the next program.
Spoken as a wonderful past chair of IABC Gold Quill. It sounds as if you just wrote a Gold Quill entry for all of us.
Yeah. It's like there's no follow-up to that one at all. Just yes, agree. I always tell folks change management isn't rocket science. It's very intuitive. And so if you're a professional communicator and you want to think about change management, kind of step back and put yourself in it. If there's going to be a significant change to me, how would I want to be treated? How would I want to be engaged? What would be important to me? And then just think about how do you turn that around and deliver that to the stakeholders who are, and I always say directly or indirectly impacted, because we always look at who's directly impacted, and oftentimes we forget those who are indirectly impacted.
I think what I would say is people's reaction to change is human. We all react the same way. Todd mentioned all of the work on the change curve is based on the grief cycle, that you're experiencing a loss, that you do start with anger, shock, and then denial, and then anger before you get to resistance. And it's that resistance that comes before we get to acceptance and commitment. And that's a cycle. Some people go through that cycle faster than others. Our job as communication professionals is to have a conversation throughout those different phases of that change cycle with employees and get them the information they need to be confident about getting to that next step. Because it really is what I struggle with is people feeling like the memo that they sent at the beginning of the change is the end of the change, and forgetting to follow through, like we talked about before. That usually when you've announced the change, that's the beginning of the work, not the end.
I will build on what everyone has said, and everyone has given excellent advice. Really, really good advice. I wish I had that when I was kicking off. I would add 3 things. Understand what change management is and the various models that are around, so you have an appreciation of what they are and where which ones fit in what sort of context. Take some time to understand how the brain works, so you understand the neuroscience around behavior change, as well as understanding how that impacts communication. And very importantly, understand what the role of communication is in terms of strategic alignment, so you genuinely know how to do that.
Wow, some sound advice from around the world. I want to say thank you to Zora and Cindy and Priya and Tosh for being able to spend time with us to talk about this world of change communications and change management. I also want to thank Anna Willey, who doesn't get enough credit for being I'll call her executive producer, and making sure that we all show up on time for recordings and we have materials taken care of. And Anna, we couldn't do this without you. A plug for episode 110 of IABC's Circle of Fellows. And if you start doing the math and dividing it by 12 months in a year, we've been at this for quite some time without a break. Number 110 comes up on Thursday, the 21st of November, if you want to mark your calendars. Some countries will already have celebrated Thanksgiving, and some countries will be a week away from it. Even places like, Canada, you've already taken care of Thanksgiving, so we don't have to worry about you guys. But there are places besides the U.S. Australia sort of has a Thanksgiving-y thing around the same day, the 28th of November. But I also found that Liberia will have already celebrated Thanksgiving. So wherever you are on the Thanksgiving curve, join us for the session that we're going to be talking about executive communication and leadership. And sitting in these seats are going to be Alice Brink, Julie Holloway, Marianne McCauley, and Bish Mukherjee. He and Shell Holtz will be back in the moderating seat. So I want to welcome all of you to join that entire crowd for our next Circle of Fellows, number 110. So thank you all. Thank you for coming in the audience, and thank you for watching this. We'll see you for the next Circle of Fellows. Take care, everybody.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Bye.